Hey, what's up, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about the history of one of my favorite little trees. I've had this tree for, I don't know, at least 15 years, and I'll give it sort of a little twirl here so you guys can see it. Um, it's been styled and restyled and restyled and restyled, and it's very much meant to be styled after like a red fir in the High Sierra. And a lot of people, when I first had it styled, the top here actually grew all these little branches, and then the tree was a little bit taller, and it was very much looking sort of like a redwood because it was basically a formal upright, and it had a full live top, and it was a little skinnier than it is right now, because basically because of the size of the tree, it is a little bit challenging to maintain the branches at the length and density that I really want. And over the years, they just sort of get longer, and they have to be successively cut back. But you can't just cut back a juniper branch at this scale and expect that you're going to be able to sort of maintain the silhouette over the long term. So I'll give you guys a couple of examples, and then I'm going to do the styling of this tree. But whenever I work on this tree, I take my time. I do a little bit of careful thinning, and then I really look at what the structure looks like, how many branches I think it needs. And it's had a lot of different iterations in the last, say, 5 or 6 years, and I've kind of liked all of them. But this is more foliage than I really want on this tree, and that means that it is time for another trim back. And this time in early summer here in San Francisco is typically when I'm working on junipers. This branch has been here for quite a while, and let's just use it as an example of how to cut back shimpaku or kishu in order to maintain a small silhouette. Now, if I kind of lay this down so that you guys can see it, there's the main branch here. It has a side branch over here that I am not going to address. That junction for that side branch is all the way up in here in the like hidden by this other branch. But let's just look at these junctions right here. So the structure is like, this is sort of a typical structure of a kishu branch that has not had a lot of wiring put to it, but it's naturally kind of made this shape with some coaxing from me, basically pulling off the lower foliage to make a nice line there. But the challenge here is it now has the beginnings of a runner. So you can see this that I'm holding with my scissors is starting to look, it's a strong tip, and it's starting to look like it's going to run. And there's a few of these on the tree, nothing really long like you would see on a young, vigorously growing juniper, but these are the kinds of tips that when you talk about pinching junipers, that you're pinching, because you don't want branch extensions with this type of growth. You want to encourage more bushy growth. So I would go through and pinch these few strong tips that are on the, kind of the center portion of each branchlet on this tree. So, but in order to cut this back, the inclination that most people have, and I remember my teacher telling me that everybody does this at first and that it's just wrong. The inclination basically is to, okay, I want this branch to be shorter, so I'm going to cut the foliage here, and then it's going to side bud or back bud, or I'm going to cut the foliage here. So you've just made like now two very small little cuts, and you've also taken off basically the strongest part of that branch and left the weaker interior portions of the branch. And at this scale, which is roughly maybe a 12-inch tree, you can use that technique, but you have to be cognizant that it will potentially weaken the tree, especially if you do it to the whole tree. So if I'm just going to do that to a couple of little branches down here, it's not going to have any real effect on the tree at all. But that level of cutback is not going to get me where I want to go with this tree after a whole year of robust growth. And basically, if I were doing that, if I were using that technique over and over and over again through the spring and summer, say I was trimming back the tree 3 times a year and cutting off those strong tips and just leaving the interior weaker growth, the tree will get progressively weaker. And not only that, it will start to form kind of like growth only on the exterior right near the ends rather than having any back budding. There's not a lot of back budding on this branch, but the surprising answer to how do you make this branch shorter, how do I reduce the amount of foliage that I have on this tree, is that you just eliminate this entire branch and use the branch that's above it. Now, at this scale, that's not always as easy to do as it is on a large scale plant. If you have a tree that has branches that are 12 inches long coming out from the canopy, it's really easy to cut back to a branch that's coming out from above on a foliage pad and then just bring that next foliage down, and then that encourages more back budding in the area above that, and it gets more sunlight. And so that's sort of like this repetition that you can use in order to maintain the size of your tree. And I'm going to show you guys a different example that comes from like a mame size tree, something that's only 3 inches tall, because it's a different technique. So Shinpaku and Kishu, similarly, Itoigao is a little bit different, but Shinpaku and Kishu will back bud, and it's probably hard for you guys to kind of see it on the video, but like, for example, there is like a little bud down underneath here that's way back in the junction of those branches. But then if I pull this aside and we're looking at just this branch, there's nothing else here, right? So I don't have a lot of options. I can't cut back to some side branch that's here. I could cut, 3/4 of this foliage off, and most likely it would send out some buds in here. But in the meantime, that's very likely to just make the tree look sort of cut back and uninteresting. So it's not the primary technique that I want to use. If you're needing to cut back long branches on a mame, and a long branch on a mame is something that's like 1 inch, then you will have to use that type of technique. So right here is a section that I've sort of continuously been cutting back, ginning, and forcing the tree to remain really short in terms of branching. And you can see there are some kind of strong little shoots that are coming out at the top of this, and there's like also these little shoots that are coming out at the junction of all of these branches. And I've done it multiple times before, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and select these branches that have previously been wired in here, and I'm probably going to gin either all of them or some of them in order to compact this. And then these branches, as they extend a little bit more, will be wired to take their place. It also allows me the opportunity to create more interesting gin, like these little teeny ones that are up here and the ones that are at the top. So I'll take those wired branches and consider turning them into deadwood. But that's the technique that I use for mame, and that is you can bend over a branch like this and expose the base of the branch to some sun. Then you'll get these little buds, especially if it's at the top. When you're down in the bottom of a larger tree, it's a little bit more difficult because there's not as much sun penetrating down to that area. But on a mame tree, you don't really have much differential between the top and the bottom. So this technique can work really well to give you little bunches of growth that are very close into the trunk when you're trying to work at a very small scale. If you want to see more about the history of this tree, check out one of the recent articles that we published on Bonsaify.com. It's a re-edited blog post that I did a number of years ago that shows some of the history. And I'm going to, like I said, contemplate and take my time on this tree, but I do expect that I will probably cut off about 50 to 60% of the foliage that you're looking at, and I've just been sort of reacquainting myself with the branch structure before I do anything. But look forward to another video on this same tree where I will work on getting it finished, and I'll see you guys soon.